one of the things I want to start doing is I want to start uh, establishing, and this is not original, but I want to start establishing through sources, multiple sources, basically how the people that consider themselves, or not consider themselves, they actually are. I don't doubt them. Christians are have fallen prey to the humanistic adage that be careful what you hate, lest you become it. So, for starters, I want to read a brief excerpt from Democracy in America from Alexis de Tocqueville. And it's going to be from, the first one is going to be from Tendencies that an American democracy, Tendencies of the American democracy as regard to salaries of public officials. There is a powerful reason that usually induces democracies to economize upon the salaries of public officers. Another portion here is, this is clearly seen in the United States, where the salaries seem, if I may so speak, to decrease as the authority of those who receive them is augmented. I mean, they get more power, less pay. And skipping over here to Government of Democracy in America. In general, democracies give largely to the people and very sparingly to those who govern them. The reverse is the case in aristocratic countries, where the money of the state profits the persons who are at the head of affairs. Now, I want to point out that that's pre-communism. So the rise of communism, the psychological effect of the war against communism was that the identification of democracy got altered in a sense to where, if Alexis de Tocqueville was writing that today, where we find that more than 50% of congresspeople are millionaires, I don't know what the number is in senators, and that we know that I don't think there's ever been an un-millionaire as the president of the United States, that Alexis de Tocqueville would no longer identify America as a democratic nation. And again, I hold democracy, I adhere to Plato's Republic, in which he associates 5 forms of government. Democracy is but one of them, and the 5 forms of government operate within the realm of the Republic. So it's aristocracy, democracy, timocracy, which is, I believe it's a military state, or a general's running it, not a military dictatorship necessarily, or a theocracy, so to speak, where you have a clergy running the nation. Oligarchy, where you have the wealthiest running the nation, and then finally you have tyranny, where you, which is a crown, which is a monarchy, to be clear, to be very clear. But part of what I want to do on that is, I'm trying to follow a pattern here where I experimented with um, salvia, and while I was on my little trip, I wanted to engage and utilize it as best I can, and I didn't get a chance to read because it did reading's not well, I didn't develop the skill to read while I was on it. But what came into my head while just having the intention to read was the book of Revelations came to my mind, and the section about the pale horse. When I was a Christian and I was a Christian in jail and people were threatening to kill me and beat me up if I didn't stop being a Christian and join gangs, and I chose to walk that lonely path. And some people get the notion that being a Christian in jail makes it an easy thing. Not in California. And not when you look like me. And not when you're young. So, but when I was in Christian, one of the things that kind of tripped me out was that when I read, and I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. Immediately, I could not get out of my head the history of America. What I ended up doing, because I identified with Christianity, is I ended up associating that to Catholicism, falling for the distinction line and saying like that's kind of like the popish figure. But that goes with the manifest destiny, the picture of manifest destiny, where they have the goddess, the Greek goddess Colonia, leading Western frontier people into the West, which we know is a nice picture and everything, but behind it was a massive massacre. But while I was in Salvia, I realized, without reading it, that, oh, that was the one that I wanted to read. So, but then the pale horse, okay? And I looked, and behold, the pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him, and power was given unto him over the fourth part of the earth to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beast of the earth. Okay, the pale horse. When I was in Salvia, I realized that pale had to mean something other than a color. It had to have a substitute definition. So I looked it up in the Britannica. You probably not going to be able to see it. There you go. In the Britannica, 1959 dictionary. And this led me to a couple things. But I'm just going to, rather than get into all of them, I'm just going to read one. And it's going to be from pale number 1, noun, and definition number 3. That which is enclosed within bounds, literally or figuratively, as the social pale. Now, what came to my mind on that one is a corporation. And without getting too ADD'd out on what it is, I believe that to incorporate speaks enough about how that can be the social pale, so to speak. That which is enclosed within bounds, literally or figuratively, as a social pale. So, getting back into this death and destruction, this is in Book of Revelations, chapter 9, verse 20 and 21, associating the enemy, the non-believers, being tricked by the Antichrist. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. And who in Western civilization, particularly in America, the way that they don't offer any apologies is they just ignore it. They just deny. It's not that this William Paley notion that it's not bad to reverse on treaties. It's not bad for white American society to renege, no pun intended, and whatever you want to call it, but on the whole concept of 40 acres and a mule, which General what's Sherman? Tecumseh Sherman, who was a general who was named after a famous Indian chief that had been defeated and his tribe massacred. Just to go to, like, honorific, okay, sure. But he was the one that was working for the Northern, and he was to rally black people on their side, freed slaves, was talking about this whole notion of 40 acres and a mule, and the same thing that they did with Indian tribes when they had with Chief Joseph, and they had these generals chasing after him, and they couldn't catch him. So what they do is they'd offer a treaty, they'd sign a treaty with him, and then all of a sudden they'd get usurped and said, "Oh, I can't." Well, General Howard was the main one with the Chief Joseph, who said, "Oh, I made a deal with you. Yeah, you can have this land up in the northwest." And instead, they ended up taking him to a dead valley, back somewhere in Kansas or something like that, on a long one of those death walks. Okay, but again, and that's something that, to understand, my whole intention here is to identify Western Christianity as their version of the Antichrist. So in some of these things too, this is going with their psychology, and there's no loss in any of this right here. This is remember, our country wasn't made before this. Our country was made from to use this as a means of massacre and death and robbery and all the theft and murder and fornication. Because all along the way, from every war, from even in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I know we got some arrogant notion thinking that our troops wouldn't have sex with those dirty Arab goat herding women. No, sorry, they rape everywhere they go. They even rape in the military bases. Even in Okinawa, they rape. I think it's 9 women get raped a year from U.S. troops just in Okinawa, and that's a civilized place where you still don't hear about it, but at least it gets recorded. So this is from Revelations 3. And to the angel of the church of Philadelphia, the original capital of the United States, write these things, saith he, the truth. Okay. He that hath the key of David. Say these things saith he that is holy, that is true, that has the key of David, that openeth, that no man shutteth, and shutteth, that no man. I know thy works. Behold, I have set before thee an open door, no man can shut it. For thou hast a little strength, and hast kept my word, and not denied my name. Again, this has all to do with the massacre, just like the foundation of Israel, where it was go into land and Canaan and kill. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews, and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come to worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee. See, Jews are fucking up, making a big mistake by thinking that Christians are supporting them for another reason. They created the state of Israel for a frickin' reason, and it has nothing to do with sympathy, because they don't have sympathy, they have no compassion. Because thou hast kept my word of thou hast kept the word of my patience, I also will keep thee from the hour of temptation, which shall come upon all the world, to try them that dwell on the earth. So this is where you get the notion that global warming, or forget global warming, global catastrophe from economic and the extinction rate being something like 50,000 species a year for the last 20 years. Bypassed off of, this has nothing to do with us. We have promises. And the fact that we profit off of it, the fact that we make money, and the fact that it reinforces our power structure is proof that God's word is true. Therefore, it teaches them to teach their kids to perpetuate the madness. He that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out. And I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God. That's a New Jerusalem, which is New Jerusalem, which cometh down out of heaven from God, and I will write upon him my new name. He that hath ears, let him hear. So that justifies all the murder, the robbery, and the raping. So I want to get into part of that, the psychology, where you want to see where the blend where that goes is with this is a book, United States Wars of the United States, Wars of America, Volume 1. This is Robert Leckie. It was printed in 1968, and this is from a section of Mexican-American War. Mexican independence climaxed a 7-year eruption of revolutions which convulsed Latin America after the fall of Napoleon. One by one, under the leadership of Jose de San Martin, Simon Bolivar, and Bernardo O'Higgins, that's San Patricio. Spain's colonies in the New World renounced allegiance to the mother country and set themselves up as free republics. Unfortunately, they did not unite as the Northern American colonies had. Such a multiplicity of young and unsteady republics, all open to the intrigues as well as the commerce of the old powers, created a dangerously unstable situation. Britain took the lead in attempting to stabilize it by asking the United States to join her in a declaration barring France from South America. But the Americans went Mother England one better. They decided to bar everyone from South America, and on December 2nd, 1823, in his annual message to Congress, President Monroe laid down the Monroe Doctrine, warning all European powers against attempting to interfere with nations in the Western Hemisphere. The United States, of course, had no power to enforce such a declaration. Only British sea power was capable of patrolling the shores of both continents. Yet Britain was at the moment deeply interested in preserving the peace in South America, just as she was not interested in expanding at the expense of new Latin republics. So the Monroe Doctrine stood up, propped up, as it were, by the British Navy, gradually solidifying into one of the pillars of American foreign policy as the nation itself grew in power and prestige. So one, that goes with, I still hold that there was no true American revolution, or whatever the hell you want to call it. That all that event was that the founding fathers were basically sellouts that gave the Bill of Rights as literally a bill of sale, so to speak, and they made it a democracy, a government of the people, and gave these Bill of Rights in order to target the subject population. And I take the War of 1812 as the way the British didn't even send over half their army, and they destroyed the capital, and then it was such a monumental defeat, but they turned around and walked away because they didn't want to take back all their colony. Like, they gave up India so quickly because Americans were too tough. American history books teach that there was a typhoon that came and wiped them out, and that goes with that divinity crap. Because to tell you the truth, that the British wanted the American experiment to succeed because it was their experiment, had a lot more to do. So this is from another book right here. This is the Unfinished Nation, also on the Monroe Doctrine. In 1850, the United States proclaimed neutrality in the wars between Spain and its rebellious colonies, implying a partial recognition of the rebels' status as nations. Moreover, the United States sold ships and supplies to the revolutionaries, a clear indication that it was not genuinely neutral, but was trying to help the insurgents. Finally, in 1822, President Monroe established diplomatic relations with 5 new nations: La Plata, later Argentina, Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Mexico, making the United States the first country to recognize them. In 1823, Monroe went further and announced a policy that would ultimately be known, beginning some 30 years later, as the Monroe Doctrine. Even though it was primarily the work of John Quincy Adams, the American continents, Monroe declared, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects of future colonization by any European powers. Close quote. The United States would consider any foreign challenge to the sovereignty of existing American nations as an unfriendly act. At the same time, he proclaimed, our policy in regards to Europe is not to interfere in the internal concerns of any of its powers. That's why it was so difficult to get Americans involved in World War I and World War II as well. The Monroe Doctrine emerged directly out of the Americans' relations with Europe in the 1820s. Americans feared that Spain's European allies, notably France, would assist Spain in an effort to retake its lost empire. Even more troubling to Adams and many other Americans was the fear that Great Britain had designs on Cuba. Adams wanted to keep Cuba in Spanish hands until it fell, as he believed it ultimately would to the Americans. The Monroe Doctrine had few immediate effects, but it was important as an expression of the growing spirit of nationalism in the United States in the 1820s, and it established the idea that the United States had dominant power in the Western Hemisphere. So, what does that dominant power look like in the Western Hemisphere? This is where you get Nixon with the, just one event. I'm just going to deal with Chile. I'm down to a couple of things. So the Monroe Doctrine has been interpreted by modern American political elites to mean that they have, this is what the war on drugs is and everything like that, which was also a term coined by Nixon. they have a sovereign right to invade and to intrude and whatnot in South America, no matter what the cost, the human cost, because they're not humans. So here we go. Central to the Nixon-Kissinger policy towards the Third World was an effort to maintain the status quo without involving the United States too deeply in local disputes. In 1969 and 70, the president described what became known as the Nixon Doctrine by the United States, who would participate in the defense and development of allies and friends and would leave the basic responsibilities to the future of those friends. To the nations themselves in practice, the Nixon Doctrine meant a declining American interest in contributing to third world development, a growing contempt for the United Nations, where underdeveloped nations were gaining influence through their sheer numbers, and increasing support to authoritarian regimes attempting to withstand radical changes from within. Those authoritarian regimes are the friends that they wanted to leave the basic responsibilities to. In 1970, for example, the CIA poured substantial funds into Chile to help support and establish a government against the communist challenge. When the Marxist candidate for president, Salvador Allende, came to power through an open election despite U.S. efforts, the United States began funneling more money, that's tax dollars, just so you understand that. This is people working in America paying for this stuff. Opposition to Chile to help destabilize the new government. In 1973, a military junta seized power from Allende and who was subsequently murdered. The United States developed a friendly relationship with the new repressive military government of General Augusto Pinochet. That's just one book, and then we're going to get into this book over here. And this is Latin American politics. Okay. I'm not going to do the whole thing. Chile. Chilean politics is the reason for the great interest in the country. Until the 1973 coup, it was one of the oldest constitutional democracies in the world. The big thing that it had was U.S.-owned copper mines. It was IT&T, actually. Okay. Margin sectored. Okay. U.S.-sponsored alliance. Okay, and cooperated actively with the U.S.-sponsored Alliance for Progress in attempting to carry out what Free called the Revolution of Liberty. Three-way elected Salvador Allende the candidate, Marxist-dominated. Allende tried to initiate a transition to socialism involving income redistribution, takeovers of industry and agriculture. That means taking away companies owned by foreigners, and which is the whole thing with the democracy in America, and accelerated class polarization. In 1973, the three armed services of the National Police overthrew Allende in what had become an institutional coup to save democracy from Marxism. Soon became a personalist dictatorship under General Augusto Pinochet, the head of the army. Pinochet closed down all the political system, but allowed a group of free market capitalists, American interests, oriented economists, many of whom known as the Los Chicago Boys, had been trained at the University of Chicago, to open up what had been a highly protected economy and drastically reduce government intervention, which has become more aristocratic, which has now become what they call communism. But again, back in the 1800s, it wasn't communism; it was actually democracy. Controversial experiment in economics, but not political libertarianism. In 1980, Pinochet appealed to Chilean legalism. Okay, because Chile has the oldest and, outside of Cuba, the largest communist party in the Western Hemisphere, the United States had taken a strong interest in its political life since at least 1958, when Salvador Allende, as a candidate for socialist coalition, came in a close second to a president election. Okay, the United States supported overtly and covertly the reformist Christian democratic regime in the 1960s, opposed overtly and covertly the Allende government in the early 70s, and was ambivalent to the Pinochet regime, repelled by its human rights violations, which led the U.S. to cut it off in 1976 from all military aid, even though supporting Chile's free market approach to development and willingness to respect its international economic obligations. Okay, The crisis was intensified by U.S. covert efforts to create turmoil in the economy, as well as by unsuccessful CIA efforts documented in a 1975 U.S. Senate investigation to promote a military coup. In a testimony to the legalism and constitutionalism of the Chilean military and people, that the constitution tradition was followed, and in November of 1970, Allende became president. In 1971, U.S.-owned mines were completely nationalized by widely supported constitutional amendment. That's very democratic. However, in 1972, runaway inflation had set in, and that goes with the U.S. crisis. The crisis was intensified by U.S. covert efforts to create turmoil in the economy. So that's proof that when, as Christians, point mostly to people of color and to the victims of their crimes because they're not willing to repent, just like their Bible talks about, that they're exactly the kind of people they are, they still do it. So I'll keep going on this as much as I can because I like it.